Okay, so picture this. You're at a dinner party. It's a nice, polite gathering. On your left, you have a chemical engineer from Houston,
Okay.
a STEM guy, right? Logical, systems-oriented, speaks perfect American English. He probably has very strong opinions on the best barbecue in Texas.
I can see him, yeah.
Yeah.
Standard suburban success story.
Yeah.
Grounded, relatable.
Totally. But then, on your right, you have a graduate from the Islamic University of Medina. And I don't mean someone who just, took a semester abroad.
Right.
I mean someone who was immersed in 1990s Saudi Arabia. Deeply traditional, rigid theology, long beard, robes, the works, a hardcore Salafi, as the term goes.
Okay, wow. Those are two very, very different vibes. One feels very modern and Western, the other feels, well, very ancient and Eastern.
Exactly. Now, imagine they are the same person.
Oh.
And just to make it even messier, drop that person in the middle of a PhD program at Yale University, one of the most liberal, secular, critical environments on earth, studying the very religion he holds sacred.
That's a recipe for an identity crisis or an explosion.
Or, as it turns out, a recipe for becoming one of the most influential and, let's be honest, controversial figures in Western Islam.
Sheikh Dr. Yasir Qadhi.
We're talking about Sheikh Dr. Yasir Qadhi. And today, we are not just doing a biography. We're looking at a brand new piece of research that uses him as a kind of master key to unlock this massive shift in how Muslims in America see themselves.
It really is a fascinating case study. The article we're diving into today is titled Between Religion and a Crisis, Yasir Qadhi's Dawah as Islamic Practical Theology in Post-October 7 America. It was published just last month in January 2026 by the scholar Elad Ben David.
2026, so this is fresh off the press.
Very fresh. And the core mission of this deep dive is to explore a specific evolution. We're looking at how American Muslim leadership has transformed from the post-9/11 era, which, as we'll get into, was largely defensive, apologetic.
Keep your head down.
Yeah, exactly. From that to the post-October 7, 2023 era.
Which, as the source argues, is so much more assertive, politically engaged, and frankly, completely unapologetic.
Precisely. And we're going to do this by unpacking two concepts that might sound a little academic, but are actually very, very grounded. Dawah and practical theology.
Okay, Dawah and practical theology. I want to get into those definitions in a second because they are clearly the pillars here. But first, I think we need to set the ground rules. We are dealing with some really heavy topics today. The Gaza war, U.S. politics, theology, identity. It's a minefield.
Absolutely. And it is so important to state right up front. Our role here is to report on the analysis that's provided in Elad Ben David's article. We are exploring how he interprets Yasir Qadhi's sermons, his millions of YouTube views, his public actions.
Right.
We're representing the source material. We're staying impartial, objective, just trying to understand the ideas being presented. We aren't here to debate the theology itself, but to understand how it's being used to move a massive community through a time of crisis.
So we aren't taking sides. We are taking a deep dive into the text. Let's start with those terms then. Dawah. I feel like I've heard this word before, and it's usually used to mean missionary work, like trying to convert people.
That is the most common literal understanding. Dawah comes from the Arabic root da, which means to invite or to call. And historically, yes, it often refers to calling non-Muslims to the faith. The source actually has a term for this. It calls it extra ummaic dawah.
Extra ummaic, meaning outside the ummah or the global Muslim community.
Correct. You can think of it as like external marketing. You're trying to get new customers to buy the product, so to speak.
Right. The have you heard the good news approach that you see in a lot of religions.
Exactly. But there's a second type, which is absolutely crucial for our discussion today. Intra-ummaic dawah.
Intra. Inside.
Inside. This is preaching that's directed at Muslims. It's about guiding the community, correcting behavior, or strengthening faith from within.
So if the first one is sales and marketing, this one is, what, HR? Internal comms?
That is actually a perfect analogy. It's internal comms and HR. It's not about getting new people in the door. It's about managing the people you already have. It's saying, hey, the world is scary right now. The company's going through a spiritual merger, and here is how we are going to survive this as a team.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah.
Because if your internal team is falling apart, it doesn't really matter how good your external marketing is.
Not at all. And the source gives us a really interesting quick history lesson here. If you look back at the classical period, we're talking 7th to 17th centuries, Dawah was often political or theocratic. It was state-sponsored.
The government's job.
The government's job. But fast forward to the modern era, especially in the West, and it changes completely. It becomes about institutions. Things like the Muslim Students Association, the MSA on college campuses, or ICNA, the Islamic Circle of North America.
So it becomes grassroots. It moves from the palace to the people.
And then the internet happens. The source quotes Muzammil Siddiqui way back in 1998.
1998.
Yeah, pre-social media as we know it, predicting that digital media would inject new life into Daweh. And my God, was he right. It moved from street corners and, cassette tapes, remember those?
Oh, I remember the cassette tapes, yeah.
From that to a global virtual enterprise, a click away.
Which brings us right back to Yasir Qadhi, who is an absolute titan on YouTube. But before we get back to him, what about this second term? Practical theology. That sounds like an oxymoron. Theology is usually abstract, right? Angels, the afterlife, the nature of God. It's stuff you talk about in a library, not in a trench.
Usually, yes. That's what we call dogmatic or systematic theology. But practical theology is where the rubber meets the road. It's not just about akida, which is your creed or your doctrine. Those things tend to stay pretty stable. You believe in one God, you believe in the prophet. That doesn't change day to day.
Right, that's the bedrock.
That's the bedrock. Practical theology is about the interaction between that belief and praxis. Praxis is just a fancy word for action. Practice.
So it answers the question, okay, I believe all this stuff, now what do I do?
Yeah, exactly. When the world is on fire, when you are facing a crisis, abstract doctrine is not enough. You can't just say God is one and leave it at that. You need to know how to navigate trauma, how to navigate social tension and political upheaval, all while keeping your faith intact.
So the source argues that Yasir Qadhi is using his platform, his dawah, as a vehicle for this practical theology. He's helping his followers figure out how to live as Muslims in a very, very turbulent America.
It's almost like it's a form of crisis management.
It is exactly crisis management. It's spiritual triage. And he's the chief medic.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, so we have the tools, we have the context. Now let's meet the protagonist properly. We teased his background in the intro, but let's really unpack who Yasir Qadhi is, because his origin story, it just seems to explain why he's so uniquely positioned to do this kind of work.
It really does. I mean, his life is a series of contradictions that somehow resolve. He was born in 1975 in Houston, Texas, to Pakistani immigrant parents.
American kid.
But he spent his early life in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. The source does note, though, that he lived in a Western bubble over there, an expat community.
Okay, so not fully immersed in local Saudi culture.
Right. Then he comes back to the U.S. for college and gets that degree in chemical engineering from the University of Houston.
A STEM guy.
Uh-huh. And I think that matters, right? I mean,
yeah.
Engineers think in systems, they think in problem solution. There's a logic tree for everything.
Very much so. It gives his theology a certain logical, almost flowchart-like structure. It's very systematic. But then comes what the article calls the Medina phase.
Right.
He goes back to Saudi Arabia, but this time not to an expat bubble. He goes to the Islamic University of Medina for a decade, a full 10 years.
A decade.
And the source, it pulls no punches here. It describes him during this time as a hardcore Salafi.
Hardcore Salafi. Let's define that for the listener who might not be familiar with the term. We hear the word a lot, especially in the news, but what does it actually mean in this specific context? So, Salafism is a strict traditionalist movement within Sunni Islam. The goal is to emulate the Salaf, which means the ancestors, specifically the first 3 generations of Muslims.
So it's about getting back to the pure original form of the religion.
Exactly. It's often characterized by a very literal interpretation of the Quran and the Sunnah and a rejection of later innovations or interpretations in the religion. The source notes that during this phase, Qadhi's views were quite rigid.
How so?
Well, he was harsh on other Islamic sects, like Shias and Sufis. And the article mentions he made some very controversial statements regarding Jews during that time. He was very much inside a specific theological silo.
He was playing by a very strict 7th century rule book and applying it to the 20th century.
That's a good way of putting it. But then he comes back to America in the early 2000s and eventually lands at Yale.
The Yale phase. And this is the part of the story that just blows my mind. He goes from Medina, where the text is the final, unquestioned, divine authority, to Yale, where that same text is just another historical artifact to be dissected and critiqued.
It's a massive, massive jump. He enrolls in a PhD program in religious studies from 2005 to 2013. And this, combined with the reality of post-9/11 America, triggers this huge transformation in him.
Wait, pause for a second. That sounds like a strict young Earth creationist deciding to go get a PhD in evolutionary biology at Oxford.
Chuckles. It's not far off. I mean, Yale is the Ivy League. It's the home of critical historical analysis. They don't treat religious texts as divine truth in the classroom. They treat them as historical documents written by human beings in a specific time and place and context.
Which must have been unbelievably jarring for a guy coming from a theology that says this is the direct, unchangeable, eternal Word of God.
Jarring is an understatement. The source describes this period as his great transformation. He couldn't just quote scripture anymore to win an argument. He had to engage with Western philosophy, with historical criticism, with deconstruction. He had to defend his faith using the language of the academy.
And the source says this broke him, or made him.
It evolved him. He moved from that rigid Salafism to what the article calls mainstream American Islam. He started to realize that the strict 7th century style rulings he learned in Saudi Arabia they just didn't work for a Muslim kid growing up in New Jersey or Houston. The context was totally different.
Right. You can't tell a kid in Houston to live exactly like someone did in 7th century Arabia. It's a hard sell. It's an impossible sell.
Exactly. And I imagine that didn't make him very popular with his old friends from the Medina days.
I bet.
So he ends up in this fascinating and probably lonely position where he's criticized from both sides. To the really rigid Salafist, he's a sellout. He's too liberal, too watered down, he's compromised.
And to the other side.
But to the American right wing, or even the moderate center sometimes, he's still seen as a radical because of his past, his beard, his rhetoric. You know, they'll pull up quotes from 20 years ago.
You can't win.
He can't win. Yet, despite that, or maybe because of it, he becomes a massive influencer. He occupies this middle ground that so many American Muslims actually live in.
He bridges the gap. He can speak Sheikh and he can speak American. He's fluent in both.
Precisely. And now, he's the chairman of the Peak Council of North America. He's the dean of the Islamic Seminary of America, and he has over 730,000 YouTube subscribers. He is the voice people turn to when they are confused, when they are in crisis.
So he's got the credentials, he's got the platform, and he's got this hybrid identity forged in fire. Now, let's look at how he handled that first major crisis, 9/11. The article calls this the first crisis.
Right. And to understand Qadhi's response, then, we have to remember the context. The scholar Larry Poston describes 9/11 as a watershed moment. You had the Patriot Act, you had surveillance of mosques, you had Islamic charities being shut down overnight, their assets frozen.
It was a terrifying time for American Muslims. I remember that time well. The feeling was very much about keeping your head down. Don't speak Arabic on the plane. Don't wear the hijab too conspicuously if you can avoid it.
It was pure survival mode. But actually, the source points out a supreme irony here. 9/11 didn't just force Muslims to hide. In a strange way, it actually forced them out of isolation. It increased Islamic visibility because they had to explain themselves.
Oh, that's a really interesting point. So they couldn't just stay in their ethnic or religious enclaves anymore.
Exactly. Before 9/11, many immigrant Muslim communities were content to just live their lives quietly, raise their families, build their mosques. Afterwards, the media was at their door. The FBI was at their door. They had to engage with mainstream America.
And Qadhi's response during this era, the article says, was defined by what it calls civilizational bridge building.
Bridge building. That sounds nice, but it also sounds defensive.
It was entirely defensive. It was apologetic. The goal was to protect the image of Islam. The message was, please don't hate us. We're good Americans too. We pay our taxes. We mow our lawns. We salute the flag.
We are not them.
Exactly. Those guys had nothing to do with us. The focus was on proving that Muslims could be good citizens. It was about identity formation, solidifying this idea of an American Islam that was financially independent, indigenous, and culturally integrated.
And the source gives a really specific example of this practical theology in action during those post-9/11 years. It brings up the Innocence of Muslims film. Do you remember that whole fiasco?
Vaguely. It was around 2012, right?
Yeah. It was a really low-budget, frankly garbage, blasphemous film that mocked the Prophet Muhammad in the most crude ways, and it caused riots and protests worldwide. Embassies were attacked. It was ugly.
Right. And a lot of the anger was visceral. It was pure rage.
Pure rage. And Qadhi's response here is key to understanding his mindset at the time. He didn't say go protest or burn things down. He said, don't just get angry. Use the insult as a catalyst. First, for spiritual devotion, get closer to God. Learn more about your prophet to defend him better. But secondly, for social engagement.
And this is where he brings up the Hilf al-Fugul, right? This part of the article I found really cool, but I need you to break it down. It seems so strategic.
It is a brilliant bit of theological maneuvering. Hilf al-Fudul, or the League of the Virtuous, was a pact of chivalry that the Prophet Muhammad was a part of in Mecca before he became a prophet.
Wait, before he was a prophet?
Yeah.
So it's a pagan pact?
Technically, yes, that's
Yeah.
the genius of it. It was a civic alliance between various tribes in Mecca to protect the weak and ensure justice for anyone who was wronged in the city, regardless of their status or tribe. The prophet was part of it as a young man, and later, after he became the prophet, he looked back on it and said, "I witnessed a pact that I would not exchange for a herd of red camels, and if I were invited to it in Islam, I would respond."
You would still join it today. That is a very specific strategic pull from history.
It's genius. Qadhi uses this pre-Islamic precedent to argue that American Muslims shouldn't just do Islamic things. He says that fighting for general social justice, civil rights, feeding the hungry, protecting the weak, gives you moral credibility in the West. It's a religious duty.
So he's basically saying you don't just have to join Muslim charities. You can join the ACLU. You can fight for Black Lives Matter. You could volunteer at a soup kitchen.
Exactly. He framed civil rights and social justice as fundamentally Islamic duties, using a pre-Islamic source to prove it. This allowed Muslims to integrate into American civic life without feeling like they were selling out their religion.
They weren't assimilating. They were practicing the Hilf al-Fudul.
Precisely.
That makes so much sense for that era. It's a way to say, hey, being a good American citizen is actually part of our sunnah, our tradition. It's a way to integrate without losing your soul.
It is. It was the perfect theology for its time.
Yeah.
But then comes October 7, 2023, and the source argues that everything, and I mean everything, changes.
This shift is palpable. If the post-9/11 era was about defense and apologetics,
Bridge building.
then the post-October 7 era is about assertiveness and political agency.
The catalyst, obviously, is the Hamas attack on October 7th and the subsequent devastating war in Gaza. The sheer scale of the destruction, the fact that it was all being live-streamed on our phones 24/7.
It sparked a profound moral and political crisis, not just globally, but specifically here in the U.S. And this is where the source introduces a psychological concept that I think is really, really important. Moral injury.
Moral injury, we usually hear that term associated with soldiers, right? Like doing something in combat that goes against your deepest moral code.
Right. The classic example is, I shot a civilian and now I can't live with myself. It's an injury to your soul.
Yes, and the source cites Sharita Hossain's study on Muslim military personnel. But here, it's applied to the broader American Muslim community. The injury doesn't come from holding a gun yourself. It comes from paying taxes. It comes from living in a country whose government is supporting actions that you find morally abhorrent.
It's the feeling of betrayal.
Yeah.
And complicity. You spend 20 years doing the Hilf al-Fudul, proving you're a good American, building bridges, and then you watch as your own government funds and arms a war that is killing people who look like you, who pray like you.
Exactly. Seeing the images from Gaza day after day and knowing that your tax dollars are in some small way connected to it, that causes a deep moral injury. It makes you question your place in the country. It makes you ask, what is my citizenship worth?
So Qadhi's job as a practical theologian is to heal this injury. Because if he doesn't, people might radicalize in one direction, or they might just leave the faith entirely in another, or they might just fall into a deep, crippling depression.
He has to give them a path forward.
So how does he do it?
He starts with the spiritual response. The source calls it faith born of suffering.
Which sounds poetic, but how does it work practically? Because people are angry. They're asking the classic question, why is God letting this happen? It's the problem of evil front and center.
And Qadhi reframes the entire narrative. He leans heavily on the Islamic concept of ibtila, which means a test or a trial from God. He argues that this crisis isn't random chaos, it's a divine trial. And the proper response to a trial is sabra.
Now, people often translate seb as patience, which can sound very passive, like just sit there, grin and bear it. God wills it, so just be quiet.
Right. And that's not what he's advocating. Qadhi redefines it here as patient perseverance or spiritual resilience. It's active, it's endurance. And he does this by connecting Gaza directly to the Sirah, the biography of the prophet. This is where he brings up the story of Sumaya and Ammar.
Break that down for us. Who were they? It's such a powerful story.
They were some of the very first converts to Islam in Mecca. We're talking about the very, very beginning when Muslims were a tiny, powerless, persecuted minority. Sumaya was a slave woman. She, her husband Yasir, and her son Ammar were tortured horribly in public by the Meccan elites for their faith.
And the prophet, what could he do?
Nothing. The Prophet Muhammad at that time had no political power. He had no army. He couldn't physically save them. The tradition says he walked by while they were being tortured. Sumaya was eventually martyred, becoming the first martyr in Islam, and he could only say, "Patience, family of Yasir, for your destination is paradise." He could only offer dua or prayer.
Wow. So he's drawing a direct parallel. He's telling American Muslims, we are in the Mecca phase again. We are powerless to stop the physical suffering.
Exactly. He argues that just as that early persecution led to the eventual victory of the Muslims, the current suffering is part of a divine trajectory. It's not random cruelty, it's a precursor to something greater. It frames the Gazans not just as helpless victims, but as martyrs in a grand cosmic narrative, just like Sumaya.
That's an incredibly powerful reframing. It doesn't take the pain away, but it takes the hopelessness out of it. It gives the suffering a purpose, a meaning.
It does. And from that, he issues a direct challenge to his audience. He calls it a spiritual upgrade. He tells his listeners, in his sermons, you cannot be the same person today that you were last year. You cannot be the same Muslim.
What does he mean by that? A spiritual upgrade?
He uses the freedom and comfort American Muslims have as a gratitude exercise, but also as a responsibility. He says, your brothers and sisters in Gaza don't have clean water to make wudu, to wash for prayer. They don't have safety. They don't have food. You have all of this. How dare you waste it? How dare you miss your prayers?
So it sounds a little like he's guilt-tripping them into piety.
In a way, yes, but it's constructive guilt. It's not meant to paralyze them. It's meant to channel their grief and anger into piety instead of despair. He's saying, honor their sacrifice by being better Muslims. That is the only thing you can control right now.
And the source notes that this actually had a ripple effect beyond the Muslim community. There was this surge of interest in Islam among Western youth. The source calls it faith born of suffering.
Yeah, it was a phenomenon. The article mentions some specific examples. The activist Sean King converting during Ramadan in 2024.
Right.
And a story about a young Texan man who converted at Qadhi's own mosque. Apparently, he had started attending pro-Palestine protests and was just so struck by the faith of the protesters and the people in Gaza.
So the argument is that seeing the spiritual resilience of the Palestinian people, literally thanking God amidst the rubble of their homes, inspired people in the West to ask, what kind of faith gives someone that kind of strength?
Exactly. It became the most powerful form of dawah without anyone even trying.
So that's the spiritual side. Get right with God. Use this pain to become a better Muslim. But Qadhi isn't just a spiritual leader. He's becoming a political firebrand. And this is where the assertiveness really comes in. This is part 6 of our outline, and it's where things get very heated.
Oh, it gets very heated. This is where Qadhi moves completely beyond the good PR and bridge building of the post-9/11 years. He starts holding power accountable, and interestingly, he starts with his own. He starts by going after Muslim leaders.
The naming and shaming.
He is incredibly harsh on the leaders of Muslim-majority countries in the Middle East. He labels leaders who normalized relations with Israel, specifically referencing the Abraham Accords, as munafiqun, hypocrites.
Ouch. That is a theologically loaded term. A munafiq in the Quran isn't just a liar. It's someone who pretends to be a Muslim on the outside but is secretly working against the faith. It's an enemy from within.
It's one of the worst things it can be called in Islamic theology. It implies you are destined for the lowest depths of hell. It's a spiritual death sentence. And he uses it to critique Egypt, Jordan, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, the UAE. He asked, where are your armies? Where is your diplomatic pressure? Why are you letting this happen on your watch?
And he uses another historical analogy here to really drive the point home, right? The boycott of Banu Hashim.
Yes, another story from the Meccan period. The powerful Quraysh tribe decided to boycott the Prophet's clan, the Banu Hashim. They cut off all food and trade. They literally tried to starve them into submission for years.
A brutal siege.
A brutal siege. But there was a pagan man, Zuhair ibn Abi Umayyah, who was related to them, and he eventually stood up in public and said, are we to eat and drink while the Banu Hashim are perishing? I will not rest until this unjust boycott is torn up. And he physically went and broke the boycott document.
A pagan man.
A pagan man. Qadhi uses this story to shame modern Muslim leaders. He's saying, even a pagan in the 7th century had more humanity and tribal loyalty than you, the leaders of Muslim nations, do today.
That is a scorching burn. I mean, he is burning bridges with those governments. He's making himself persona non grata.
He is, and that shows his independence. He's not on anyone's payroll. He's an American cleric, and he's using that freedom to speak his mind.
But, okay, so he's yelling at foreign leaders. What does he tell American Muslims to do? Because he admits we can't send an army, we can't break the blockade ourselves. It feels hopeless.
Right. He acknowledges what he calls the impossible American context. American Muslims cannot offer military aid. So he pivots. He pivots to civic action, lobbying, voting, media work, protesting.
He calls it the logic of speech.
Exactly. The argument is, if you cannot fight injustice with your hands, you must fight it with your tongue. And if you can't even do that, you must hate it in your heart, which is the weakest form of faith. He argues that for American Muslims who have freedom of speech, silence is a religious failure. If you have a voice and you don't use it, you are complicit.
And he invokes American heroes to make this point relatable to his audience.
He does. He brings up Muhammad Ali.
Of course.
Muhammad Ali refusing the Vietnam draft on moral and religious grounds. He brings up Malcolm X. He frames them as models of righteous resistance within the American system. He's telling his followers, you don't have to choose between being Muslim and being American. You be a good American by resisting injustice, just like Ali and Malcolm did. It's the most American thing you can do.
That is such a fascinating flip from the post-9/11, please like us, we're good citizens energy. It's now, we are going to use our American rights to change America from within.
It's a shift from seeking acceptance to demanding accountability. It's moving from, may I please have a seat at the table, to this table is unjust and I'm flipping it over.
This brings us to the coalition building. Because you can't change America alone. You need allies. And this is where the article gets into some really nuanced and, frankly, controversial territory, especially regarding Jewish-Muslim relations.
This is critical, and it's where Qadhi has to walk a very, very fine line. He makes a very specific, repeated distinction. Anti-Zionism is not the same as anti-Semitism.
Which is a distinction that is, to put it mildly, hotly debated in the public sphere right now.
It is the debate of the decade. But Qadhi doubles down on it. And he uses history to make his case. He cites the golden age of Muslim Spain, Al-Andalus, where Jews and Muslims flourished together. He talks about Muslims protecting Jews during the Holocaust, bringing up examples like Sultan Muhammad V of Morocco, or Muslims in France and Albania who hid Jews from the Nazis.
So he's trying to establish that there is no inherent eternal war between the two faiths. He's saying the conflict is modern and political.
Exactly. He's saying, we don't hate Jews. We oppose this specific political project of Zionism. And he's very strategic about it. He goes out of his way to praise groups like Jewish Voice for Peace and the ultra-Orthodox anti-Zionist rabbis from Neturei Karta. He says, these are our allies. We need to team up with them.
The source compares his approach to that of another major American cleric here, Hamza Yusuf. How do they differ on this point?
It's a real study in contrast. The source notes that Hamza Yusuf has historically been more conciliatory toward Israel and Zionism. His focus is on Abrahamic ethical frameworks, highlighting the shared heritage of the religions, the common ground. It's a let's-all-get-along approach.
A kind of interfaith kumbaya.
A bit, yes. And it has its place. But Qadhi's approach is different. The source says he's more confrontational toward the political ideology of Zionism, but more explicitly conciliatory toward Jews, specifically as potential allies against Zionism.
That's a key distinction. One seeks peace through broad, shared commonality. The other seeks a specific political alliance against a specific policy. It's much more targeted.
Exactly. And this pragmatic, and some would say ruthless, alliance building gets even more surprising in the next section. The LGBTQ protest controversy.
Oh, right. This is where the practical theology really gets tested. Because traditionally, conservative Islam, and especially the Salafi background that Qadhi comes from, is not exactly LGBTQ friendly.
Not friendly is putting it very mildly. Theologically, Qadhi's position is that homosexual acts are major sins. That hasn't changed. The article is clear on that. He hasn't become a progressive liberal on social issues.
Okay, so that's his baseline.
That's his baseline. But here's the conflict. You go to a pro-Palestine protest in New York or London or on a college campus, and who do you see?
You see everyone. You see the socialists, you see the students, you see environmental groups, and you definitely see pride flags. You see signs that say Queers for Palestine.
Right. And for a traditional conservative Muslim, standing under a pride flag is problematic,
to say the very least. And some conservative clerics, the article mentions a Salafi preacher named Uthman ibn Farouk basically said, we can't be there, we can't march with them.
Yes. Ibn Farouk argued for ideological purity. He said, I cannot dilute my faith or be seen to endorse something that God forbids by standing shoulder to shoulder with it. He told Muslims to stay away from those protests.
So what does Qadhi say? Because he can't just suddenly say, it's fine, right?
Right.
That would destroy his credibility with his entire conservative base.
No, he doesn't change the theology. He changes the priority. This is the practical in practical theology in its purest form. He issues a ruling, a fatwa, that says, look at the scale of the crisis. We are talking about what he and many others describe as a genocide in Gaza.
So it's a triage situation. Save the dying patient first, worry about everything else later.
Perfect word for it, triage. He argues that the primary cause justice for Gaza, saving lives, is halal, permissible, and it takes precedence over the secondary issues. He says, don't lose the forest for the trees.
So he's essentially telling his followers, the enemy of injustice is my ally, even if we disagree on literally everything else.
Yes. He argues that unity for the Palestinian cause overrides the need for ideological purity in the protest lines. He says, you aren't endorsing their lifestyle by walking next to them. You are both walking for the same child who is under the rubble in Gaza.
That is a massive pragmatic leap. It is the definition of realpolitik in a theological context.
It is. He's essentially using an intersectionality strategy, even if he would never, ever use that word himself. He realizes that to leverage American civic power, Muslims need numbers. They need to be part of a broader coalition. And if you start excluding potential allies because of theological disagreements, you lose political efficacy. You become pure, but you become irrelevant.
That is the core tension right there, isn't it? Purity versus relevance.
Exactly. And he chose relevance.
So let's zoom out. We've gone from the defensive Hilf al-Fudul bridge building of 2001 to the assertive name and shame coalition building of 2025. We've seen Qadhi navigate the spiritual crisis and the political reality. What does this source say this all adds up to? What is this new American Muslim identity that he's helping to shape?
The conclusion of the article synthesizes this shift beautifully. It says, we have moved from a community that was trying to be American in the sense of fitting in, being accepted, proving their loyalty to a community that is now trying to change America.
That's a powerful line, from seeking approval to seeking influence.
And Qadhi's practical theology has three dimensions that enable this. First, the spiritual dimension. Grief isn't allowed to become despair. It's channeled into piety. I am sad, so I will pray more. It's a coping mechanism, but also a source of strength.
Okay.
Second, the communal dimension. The global ummah is strengthened through the shared moral outrage. American Muslims feel more connected to the global body of Muslims than ever before. The borders have dissolved in their hearts. It's a powerful sense of solidarity.
And third,
The political dimension. This is where religious obligation is converted into civic repertoires. Voting isn't just a civic duty anymore. It's a religious act of resistance. Protesting is a form of dawah. Speaking truth to power becomes a form of worship.
but the source also notes a limitation here, doesn't it? It's not all victory laps and triumphalism.
No, it's not. And this is a really crucial, sobering point. The source is very clear. While this theology is incredibly effective at building resilience and spiritual strength and communal bonds, it has a very limited ability to actually change the material reality on the ground in Gaza.
Right. A sermon in Texas, no matter how eloquent or powerful, doesn't stop a bomb in Rafah.
Exactly. The bombs are still falling. The blockade is still there. Qadhi's theology is one of endurance and fostering a long-term political shift. It's not a magic wand. It helps the community survive the trauma and organize for the future, but it hasn't yet stopped the source of the trauma.
So it's a theology for the long haul. It's building the spiritual and political muscles for a fight that might take a generation.
That's the feeling you get from the article, yes.
This has been such a journey. I mean, we started with a chemical engineer in Texas, and we've ended with a global theological shift. Yasir Qadhi really is the perfect case study for this learner mindset. He's constantly adapting his theology to fit the crisis at hand. He's not static.
He shows that theology isn't just some static thing sitting in a dusty book. It's alive. It breathes. It has to react to the news cycle. It has to provide answers for the moment. It has to, or it dies and becomes irrelevant.
So here is the provocative thought I want to leave our listeners with today. The source suggests that this isn't just about Yasir Qadhi. He's just the lens through which we can see this bigger change. What we're seeing is a sign that Western Muslims are no longer afraid that political dissent will cost them their citizenship.
They're not afraid of being told to go back where you came from.
Exactly. They are moving from being guests in America who have to be polite and grateful to being owners of their narrative who have a right to be angry and a right to demand change.
And that raises a huge question, a question for all of us. If this assertive, politically engaged theology continues to grow, What does the future of the American political landscape look like? We are seeing a voting bloc that is religiously motivated, highly educated, young, increasingly affluent, and no longer willing to settle for just being tolerated. They want a seat at the head of the table.
That is a massive new variable for the next decade of U.S. politics. It's not just a religious story anymore. It's a political earthquake happening in slow motion.
Indeed. It's something every political strategist from every party should be watching very, very closely.
Something for all of us to mull over. Thanks for diving deep with us today. We'll see you on the next one.